Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Casey Winters with us. Casey, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Casey, you are currently the Growth Marketing Manager at Pinterest, and before that, you were the first marketer at Grubhub. And you actually had a really cool story at Grubhub, so I want to start there, and then we'll kind of move into the Pinterest stuff, and we'll do this chronologically. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All right, so Grubhub, you helped them grow from 3 cities to 500 cities. What was that expansion experience like? I mean, most people don't get to go through something quite that cool.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal. So for those who don't know, Grubhub's a marketplace that shows diners every restaurant that will deliver to their location, and you can order food online from the app or from the website. So when I joined, I was talking to one of the co-founders, and he said something like, this probably only works in 6 cities or so. And then we just kept launching more and more, and all the new cities were growing faster than the earlier cities. And we're just kind of like, we don't really know where this thing stops. It was a lot of grunt work, but it never felt chaotic because we had kind of just knew how to do it after a while. So we didn't really think about it until you like look back and you're like, wow, 3 to 500, like 40,000 to 3 million users. It's not something you like go in and think you're going to be able to do, but it just kind of happened.
Yeah, what were the assumptions that the founder made that made him think it was only going to work in 6 or 7 cities? Was there some limiting belief he had there or something?
Yeah, well, we just didn't know how popular delivery was outside of a few major cities. So we knew it was popular in Chicago where we were. We knew it was popular in New York. We didn't know really if people were doing it outside of the couple big, most dense cities. And I think what we saw after a while is that as long as we made it easier and made people realize, hey, there are these restaurants I can order from, that the demand was always there. It just wasn't, easily aggregated, so people knew.
Yeah, it's just interesting to hear because usually I think we overestimate how big our ideas can be, and then they're much smaller in reality. And this is a case where it was much bigger in reality than you initially thought. So it was a good problem. Now you actually managed a team to kind of make that growth happen. You didn't do it all by yourself, right, in terms of marketing?
Yeah, so I had a team of 3 to 5, depending on the time period and what we were doing.
Gotcha. And so talk to me a little bit about how you structured that team or what tasks they had, because I think it's so valuable to learn marketing, but it's also really valuable to learn how to lead a marketing team. So what are some things you kind of learned there?
Yeah, so the advice I give people when they're trying to build a growth team or build kind of a startup marketing team is that you want to come in and test a bunch of different growth opportunities yourself, so you can really learn what the big opportunities are going to be, what could scale further if it had someone spending 100% of their time on it. So that's basically what I spent my first year doing. Did a lot of work on SEM, did a lot of work on email, did a lot of work on various other acquisition strategies. And it was clear that SEM and email were going to be the big acquisition and retention drivers, and that if we had someone focused on them 100% of the time, that they would be able to scale a lot further, be a lot more cost effective. So then I just went out to the market and found the best people to do that and brought them on the team. The other thing I would think about when you're growing a team is it's really easy to say oh, I don't have time to do this, so let me bring someone on. But if that thing's only going to be important for a month, then you got to find out what else can that person do. So you really want to validate what is the long-term need, can that really be a role, and then how do I make sure that that's one role instead of 5. So what we spent a lot of time doing was figuring out how to automate repeatable processes and figure out how to scale things with a lean team, because at least early on we didn't have a lot of money to be building a gigantic marketing team. So generally, I would say, try to put out little tests, try to see what could scale with, amplifying the team, and then go find subject matter experts. And in terms of managing them day to day, what I started with was me directing a lot of here's where we need to go the next month, the next 2 months, and then trying to train the people on the higher level strategy of startup growth, so that over time those people are managing the execution and the strategy. And I think that's the only way that you can continue to scale, because you're not going to be 2-3 years down the road the expert on email and SEM and SEO, and mobile at the same company. It's just too much to keep in your head.
Yeah, so on day one, it was almost like you were the architect that had the strategy, and you were just finding these people that were really good at the specific things that you knew would work. So when you hired early on, you didn't hire great marketers. You hired great people for search engine marketing, or you hire great people for email marketing. But then as you kind of evolved and things went further, you started to let them do more strategy and expected them to do more strategy, so that they became kind of higher level startup growth people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's awesome advice. And I love the idea of you testing the water and then hiring for that specific channel, because I can imagine, marketing is so broad now that if you just hired a good marketer, they might be useless at the one thing you actually needed for the next year.
Exactly. And if you're bringing on that marketer before you know what's really going to be the high impact thing, you're just probably not going to find the person that most closely aligns to your biggest growth drivers.
Yeah, I really like that. Know the growth drivers, hire for those growth drivers, let them do strategy later, not on day one. Now, when you went into a new city, going from 3 to 500, did you have to roll out an entirely new marketing plan for each city? Or was it just a carbon copy of the marketing plan from other cities? How did that expansion work from a marketing point of view?
Yeah. So our goal when I started was to basically build a replicable growth engine that we could use to launch every city. And eventually we were able to do that. You would have like some minor tweaks based on, some specific opportunities that might be available in one city, but otherwise it was basically the same. So we'd send a couple salespeople in for a few weeks. They'd talk to restaurants. They'd come back with a few dozen restaurants that would be willing to work with us day one. I would go and create landing pages for all of those restaurants, and then all the city, zip code, neighborhood, college, and cuisine combinations that represented those restaurants. We would make all of those available to search engines, and then we would bid on paid search for those where we had enough of a density that we could get a good CPA. So for something like San Francisco Thai, if we had, let's say, 6 restaurants, we knew our conversion rate would be good enough to be able to get a good cost-effective CPA, so we turned that on. So that was basically the process. And then once we had all that ready to go, we would go to press and we would say, hey, we're launching in your city. We'd love to get $10 off to your readers. And to use that, here's a promo URL they can go to. So that promo URL would work for like 30 days. And then we would just redirect it back to the SEO page, which would give us the authority to rank really high for those keywords.
Yeah.
And that was basically the process we used every time.
And that was enough to kind of get the whole thing going. So you only start out with 12, 20 restaurants, whatever, but then you would grow to much more because of the initial PR and all that stuff?
Yeah, and we would continue to have salespeople try to grow that market. But as long as we were able to get somewhere in like 30 to 50 to start, we had enough where we could continue to grow the diner side, which would attract more restaurants.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you mentioned, kind of the big things for you guys were search engine marketing, which you already mentioned a little bit of how you use that, and then also email marketing. So the search engine marketing, you were driving them to these landing pages, at first. Was there any kind of ongoing SEM that you were doing beyond just driving them to these landing pages?
Yeah, basically it was getting as refined as possible as we could with the local targeting and the cuisine targeting. So we would constantly be growing from like the center of a city outward. And then which means we'd have to constantly add new neighborhoods, new zip code coverage, that sort of stuff. Yeah. But basically we were always targeting people that were typing stuff like, neighborhood plus delivery, neighborhood plus Mexican or whatever. And you just continue to expand that base of keywords out. Yeah. As you added in the restaurants at the top that covered, those keywords.
That's an interesting strategy, because I think about it's one thing if they're typing in delivery, obviously that they're a possible customer, but neighborhood plus Mexican or neighborhood plus, Thai, it doesn't necessarily say I want delivery, but you guys found that you could still go into those niches and get them thinking about it and become a customer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It broadens the amount of keywords you can play with if you start thinking about your business in different ways and thinking that I can educate them and maybe they'll like this, even though it's not what they were looking for. I think sometimes we think about SEM like it's another Google search. They were looking for it or they weren't, but you were actually converting them through the search.
Yeah, I mean, no one was looking for online ordering back in 2008, right?
True.
But if people were searching for food delivery, we felt comfortable that we could, have our message be, hey, this is a better way to order food and get that conversion. And after you do that for a while, you can also expand outward even further up that to all restaurant keywords, all cuisine type keywords. Generally a better strategy on the SEO side than the SEM side, because the conversion lead time can be a little bit longer. Yeah. But certainly a great way to expand your keyword base.
Yeah. Now, talk about email marketing. You said that was kind of the other big component that you knew you wanted to hire for. What did you guys do in terms of email? To get on a list on day one, and you're just hitting them with something every week? Is it as simple as that, or was it more complicated?
Yeah. So when I started, email I thought was going to be, a big retention driver for Grubhub, but I didn't really do a good job of convincing the founders of it. So I just started sending manual emails, and like the lists were basically cut by city. So I would find like 5 restaurants that covered 5 different areas of the city, and then like blast it to the entire city, and built that up to like thousands of orders a month. And at that point, I was able to convince the business that, hey, there's something here. This me sending blast, one-off manually doesn't scale, as we continue to grow the number of cities we're in. So we invested in kind of an automated and personalized system. So what we do is once a week, we have like certain number of templates, right? New restaurants that deliver to you, highest rated, most popular, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And we would send one of those templates completely personalized for your last search delivery address to you. And that's been very effective at just making people aware of the restaurant options they have and then bringing them back to order.
Yeah. And now, was that a tool that you guys built yourself, or is that, Marketo or HubSpot or something else?
We used ExactTarget.
Okay.
So the recommendation algorithm we built ourselves, and then we would upload that data into ExactTarget and have a lot of complicated logic looking at like the previous templates you had seen to determine which one you should get this week to prevent email fatigue.
All right, let me ask you this. Does the complicated logic pay off? Because I'm always tempted to think, am I going to get just such a marginal increase that it's worth all this time of building this engine? Or is it really worth it in the end to make it that logic, that specific to the user? What was your all's experience?
Yeah, so I can tell you overall, from moving to like the manual process to ExactTarget, we're able to triple the percentage of orders that came from email.
Wow.
It's hard to parse out how much of that was personalization versus how much of that was the logic side. I think it was a combination of the both, but we didn't do an exact experiment to parse out which one. I would say generally it's worth it. Email, there's certainly a lot of upfront time, but it's one of those things where once you set up that process, those jobs can just run automatically in the future.
Yeah.
And if you get it right, the dividends are there. The thing you always worry about with email is if you're sending the same content all the time, that people just get fatigued and then they stop opening stuff. So we really thought it was important to vary up the content a lot.
With those different templates.
We've seen pretty low unsubscribe rates with that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Now at Grubhub, you also did a little bit of mergers and acquisition. You actually acquired a company. So talk to me about that a little bit. Who'd you acquire, and was that super difficult integrating all that together, or how'd it go?
Yeah, so we acquired a company called Campus Food, which had a similar product to Grubhub, but was only available in college towns. So my task there was to figure out how to maintain all the search engine rankings they had, because they were ranking very well for like, University of Wisconsin food delivery, stuff like that. And also to figure out how to transition their entire user base to a new website before the school year ended. So we did a lot of research to understand who those customers were, who were the valuable ones, who were the not so valuable ones. And we built a system where if you tried to go to Campus Food, we'd redirect you to Grubhub, but we'd have kind of this overlay that explained, hey, what happened? Here's how to migrate your account, and in the case of if you're a really good user, get some free food out of it. We wanted to make sure that we migrated all the people that were really ordering a lot of food, so we were generous with how much money we gave them to switch over. But if you were someone that had only really ordered once, then we weren't going to give you anything. We just told you to migrate your account. Yeah. And that was a really effective strategy for us. We were able to really grow our base of cities that we covered and maintain most of that user base and transition a lot of them to Grubhub when they graduated, because the problem Campus Food had is that they had you for 4 years and then you went off to the big city, and there was really no way for them to continue to have you as a customer.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I don't know how much you bought them for, and I don't need to know, but you bought them. As you look at it, if you had taken that same amount of money that you bought them for and you invested it in paid, PPC, something like that, was buying them a much better ROI overall? Or was it kind of a break even? You could have grown either way and it'd been about the same. What do those metrics look like there?
Yeah, I would say making the decision to acquire them is much more effective. The problem you have with a marketplace is that there are limitations on how fast you can grow, because you need to build up both sides of the business, right? So when you're starting a market from scratch, it could have taken 10 years to catch up to where Campus Food was in a lot of these college campuses. But we were able to kind of immediately have all those people transition and start using Grubhub. So there's a temptation to say like, oh, let's just double the amount we're spending on PPC. And we certainly tried that experiment before, but we found that we would hit like an efficient frontier where we could spend more, but we'd basically get the same amount of new customers from it and then just end up paying more for each customer from a CPA perspective. Yeah. So we certainly tried going bigger in marketing and found that, as a marketplace, it's just not really effective. You find out where your limits are and where you can still get effective CPAs, and then you need to kind of look for a new channel to augment, and M&A turned out to be a good one there.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I'm always interested in companies that do M&A, especially when they're smaller companies like Grubhub, and yet they're still out buying companies and making it work. I think it's just a growth channel we don't think about as much as other channels. So it's interesting to just kind of entertain the idea for the people watching this. Now, looking back at your time at Grubhub, what do you feel like was your best decision as the head of marketing there, and which decision is probably the worst decision, if there is one?
Yeah. So I made a lot of mistakes.
We all do.
Yeah. I'd say the best decision I made was to just adopt a consistent framework for what success and failure was from a growth perspective. We decided really early on that we wanted to make our money back off of every new user within 6 months. And we evaluated every new marketing initiative we did on that goalpost. So it didn't matter how cool something was or how much awareness we received. If it wasn't generating a CPA that made us money in 6 months, we stopped it. And I think as you're a lean startup, that's a really good to have kind of adopt a rigorous framework like that. Because otherwise in marketing, you can spend a ton of money on campaigns that don't really help you and convince yourself it's worth it based on some sort of vague understanding of awareness or whatnot. But we said like it either brings in the users right then or it doesn't, and we're moving on.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of the direct marketing mindset being brought to maybe a more traditional marketing role of it has to give me a positive ROI in some realistic time frame, because we're not doing this for awareness, and that's what modern marketing is becoming. It's leaving awareness and going toward something much better, I think, in a lot of ways. Not that we need to be direct marketers totally. Brand matters, awareness matters, but we need to have just some hard numbers into the day.
Yeah, I mean, brand was a fantastic investment for us. We thought we grew a lot via word of mouth, but when we tried to dig into word of mouth, we found that people were really embarrassed to talk about using Grubhub. Really? They didn't want to talk about how they stayed in on Friday night and ordered pizza. They wanted their friends to think that they were off, at some cool new bar or restaurant. So we invested in kind of a really quirky brand where if you didn't want to talk about, this use case, you could at least talk about some quirky ad we did or some ridiculous tweet we made or the liner notes of our latest app update that were, referenced something weird from the 80s. So we thought that brand was extremely important, but we didn't say, hey, because this is brand focused, we're not going to measure it on, efficiency and cost per acquisition.
I like that outlook. So that's kind of the best decision. You had a framework. What do you feel like is maybe one of the worst decisions you made there as a marketer?
Yeah, I think sometimes trying to move fast, I made some mistakes. So early data doesn't necessarily represent, the long-term data. So a couple of examples is like we tried acquisition via coupon sites like Groupon, RetailMeNot, and the early data always looks great, right? Your Groupon customers, they come in, they purchase immediately, they come purchase again at full price, and you're like, this is great. But then when you measure it over the long term, you see all these people who wait until the expiration date of the coupon to order, and like those people never came back. So in aggregate, it wasn't an effective acquisition channel. Similar with RetailMeNot, like you try spending some money there and you're like, oh, it's cost effective, these people are coming back and they're ordering again, and then you're like, wait a minute, my total number of users didn't really go up. And you just realize that they're stealing share from direct because it's people that like get to the confirmation page, see you have a coupon code field, and then Google that.
RetailMeNot.
And then RetailMeNot gets the credit.
Yeah.
So what I always tried to do after making those mistakes was measure things on like a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month scale to really make sure that everything mapped to our goals. And if there was a reason that I thought things didn't really make sense or things were too good to be true, really doing a deep dive to understand the psychology there of what's going on. But the couple times I didn't do that, I felt like we wasted some money on some ineffective stuff.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for being so open about that. That's awesome to learn from. So let's talk about Pinterest a little bit. How long have you been at Pinterest now as the growth marketing manager there?
Yeah, I started in December, so it's been about 10 months.
All right, cool. So you had a little bit of time there already. So what does a growth marketing manager do? What does your day to
Yeah.
day actually look like?
I'm not even sure if that's my official title anymore. I don't know. It's been kind of a blur.
Well, what do you do no matter what we call you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a highly variable. So you can think of me as functioning as like a product manager for retention, SEO, and landing page optimization.
Hmm.
So generally, I'm working with engineers and designers on implementing new ideas, measuring impact, stuff like that. So I'll either be writing strategies out, planning the next few weeks of development, spending a lot of time in Excel or writing SQL queries to like understand how an experiment's performing or how users are doing a certain thing, that sort of stuff.
So it kind of sounds like it's similar to especially what you did earlier at Grubhub, where you're kind of the guy with a strategy. You see the overall play from SEO to landing page to conversion and retention, but you're not designing it and you're not building the landing page in code. And you're not doing all the things manually yourself, but you're overseeing the strategy and making sure all the pieces come together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I think it's awesome. It's cool to think about that because some companies, they need people like you and they just don't know it yet. Because right now it's somebody just doing it all when really they have a strategic mind, and if you gave them people to do some of these other roles, they might be able to accelerate growth a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as like a lot of growth companies, they're just, blindly doing a bunch of experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's like being in a dark room trying to search for the door. And if you can add in like an understanding of the strategy and an understanding of the user, it would be like turning a light on so you know immediately where to go.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do. There's still a lot of, manual work that goes into making Pinterest grow, but I'm trying to make sure we align it to like a broader strategy and that we really are learning things every time instead of just kind of blindly running experiments.
Yeah. Now, some of the areas you mentioned on your LinkedIn profile that you're kind of focused on and that you just mentioned, SEO, email, and mobile. So just walk me through a little bit what you're doing in those areas at Pinterest, because it's always fun to kind of, peer behind the curtain and see what a company that we all respect is actually doing on the same kind of tactics that we're trying to execute on. So like SEO, for instance, what is Pinterest doing there to really move the needle?
Yeah, so SEO is an extremely important acquisition channel for us. Pinterest has loads of content, over 30 billion pins.
Yeah.
So our task is to help Google understand what all this content is about, since it's highly visual. So we're constantly thinking about, what are ways that we can add text on the page that will help Google understand, like, oh, this board is about X. So when people are searching for that on Google, we should show up. The other thing that we spend a lot of time working on is helping Google find the right content amidst this sea of pins. Mm-hmm. Google's not going to crawl all 30 billion pins, right? It just doesn't have that amount of time to allocate. So we got to spend time figuring out, where to link to, what to show in our sitemaps, so that Google sees the things that are actually helpful for them and doesn't see, all the duplicates or all of the things that just aren't really relevant for what anyone's searching for.
Yeah.
And that might sound kind of boring, but it's extremely successful work if you hit on the right things. And we've been able to grow a lot via that recently.
Yeah. So it's really kind of this complicated dance you have to do with Google to make sure the SEO works for you guys.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference between like the SEO we do here at Pinterest and at a lot of typical companies is it's not keyword focused, right? It's not like, oh, we're trying to rank for a visual discovery tool or something like that. It's, we already have all this content. There are hundreds of millions of keywords we can rank for based on that. We're not picking and choosing amongst those what we want to rank for. Mm-hmm. We're just trying to apply strategies across all of that content so Google can figure out what it's all about.
Yeah, it's definitely this big macro kind of SEO strategy. What about email? What are you guys doing with email there?
Yeah, so email is pretty central to the product as it's our engagement loop, right? So someone repins your content, you see that, you come back to Pinterest, you post more content, it gets more repins, things like that. What we actually spend most of our time on now with email is kind of a dual-headed strategy where we're recommending personalized content based on your previous pins and boards and curating content on specific topics that we think are relevant for your interest. Yeah. So if you've been pinning about food and drink related things, we'll send you topics. I think the last week it was about mustard. Historically we've done like bacon and eggs and all sorts of different topics. So we kind of have this balance of curated manual stuff and automated personalized content that just gets sent out automatically.
Yeah, again, it kind of goes back to what you're doing at Grubhub. You were sending out these emails on scale that were personalized and curated for that city. It seems like the same kind of thinking is being applied with the emails there at Pinterest, which is cool.
Yeah.
What about mobile? What are you guys doing there from your point of view?
Yeah, so we don't spend any mobile money on mobile advertising or anything, but most of our usage today is on mobile devices. So we really invest in making the product work mobile first. And what that means from a growth perspective is you have to invest in deep links in the app and make sure all those work really smoothly. You need to have a very robust push notification strategy. Our app store listings need to be fully optimized. Mm-hmm. So we spend a lot of time, making sure all of that stuff is perfect. And we treat push notifications very similar to how we treat the email channel, mm-hmm. where it's, a main retention driver. So we're constantly testing strategies there.
Yeah. Now, when you kind of compare the two, the stuff you were doing at Grubhub and the stuff you're now doing at Pinterest, is it same strategies, same ideas, just a different company, and really it applies to both? Or is it just a different animal being at Pinterest and doing these things? Did you have to relearn all the stuff you knew when you came to Pinterest 10 months ago? How do you compare them?
Yeah. So I'd say it's a kind of in between the two that you described. So there was definitely a bigger learning curve than I expected. The scale of Pinterest is just so different, and the tools in your toolbox are different too. So, paid marketing, which I spent a lot of time doing at Grubhub, is not really an applicable strategy for Pinterest because we're still figuring out, our revenue model and all of those things. There's just no way to know, what a 6-month value of a user is to be able to understand what your CPA should be. So a lot of my Grubhub experience just kind of goes away right there. And on the scale side, some things that work when you're sending 90 million emails a year don't work when you're sending over 90 million a day. So those are the things where I had to kind of relearn what's appropriate. Mm-hmm. The other thing that was different is that at Grubhub, it was really easy to tell what success looked like, right? People either ordered or they didn't. Mm-hmm. And at Pinterest, there's so many things you can do. And none of them tie directly to financial rewards for the company at this point. Mm-hmm. So it can be a little bit harder to tell, what to optimize for. Clearly you want to drive signups and clearly you want people to come back. But beyond that, do you want them to do repinning? Do you want them to create boards? Do you want them to follow people? All of those, it's kind of left up to interpretation. Yeah. But the core organic strategies, like you mentioned, that I used at Grubhub, like SEO, email, conversion optimization, a lot of that stuff still works extremely well here. And that's where I've been able to, provide a lot of the gains since I've started.
Yeah. Well, Casey, this has been an awesome interview. I just have 2 final questions for you. One, I just thought it would be kind of fun to ask. After the interview, what are you working on today?
Yeah, so I'll be working on finalizing our Q4 retention roadmap, just figuring out the strategies and the projects we want to do to, increase retention. I'll be working with a designer and a copywriter on a new welcome email series that we're about to roll out. And I'll be writing some title tags and meta descriptions for some new mobile-focused SEO pages. And I'd say that's probably a typical day.
That's awesome. And then the last question, I ask this to all the guests, is what's the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
Yeah. So, a lot of startups ask me this question, and they're always asking me about little hacks they can do to grow. And I think what you're looking for at a startup, you're not looking for a little hack that provides a one-time bump. You're looking to build sustainable growth, right? And you do that by building systems and investing in them over the long term. Mm-hmm. Sure, you want to get a short-term return on that because you don't want to go out of business while you're trying to build, kind of a long-term growth engine. Mm-hmm. But you want to build something that's basically a gift that keeps on giving. And so my advice typically is to try to build long-term growth systems or growth engines, not try to look for a hack that's going to work for 3 months and then you're going to need to find something else because then your growth is going to be very bumpy and that's not what you want because you'll end up not getting to where you're trying to go.
Yeah, well, that is perfect advice to end on. So Casey, thank you again for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.